Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 26th session of the Tech and Innovation Center series, part of the local infrastructure hub. As you join the Zoom and get settled, I welcome you to follow Rachel's lead and share your name, role, and organization in the chat so we have a sense of who's here. My name is Tina Walla, and I'm the CEO of US Digital Response, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit that works alongside state and local governments to strengthen digital services. This series is a part of the Local Infrastructure Hub, which aims to help America's towns and cities take full advantage of federal infrastructure funding. This session is brought to you by Cornell Tech and US Digital Response and is supported by our funders Bloomberg Philanthropies, Balmer Group, Emerson Collective, Ford Foundation, Kresge Foundation, and Waverly Street Foundation. Now we'll go to the next slide, and I want to sort of give a quick refresher on what this series aims to do. We aim to inspire local government leaders like all of you about the integration of technology that improves city infrastructure, both today and in the future. 4 key values guide this series, as shown on this slide. First, we're driven by shared goals. We don't believe in technology for technology's sake. Second, we want to design for people. Technology processes and products have to reflect the needs and desires of deeply diverse individuals and communities. We know that we're not all the same, so we got to figure out how do we design for everybody. Third, we believe in approaching this work with a commitment to resourcing this work. We want to think about long-term sustainability and how to plan for workforce, policies, and regulation, particularly as those are changing. And last but not least, we want to build for trust. Tech and innovation should deliver solutions that are transparent, secure, available, reliable, and mindful of privacy considerations. Now, today, we're focusing on how accelerating adoption of autonomous vehicles by mobility providers, freight and delivery services, and consumers will create challenges and opportunities for city infrastructure systems. That's why you're all here. We're going to be hearing from transportation officials in cities where AVs are already operating. And we're going to hear from them some of the long-term issues that are raised by ongoing rollouts. As always, we're then going to open it up to questions. We want to make sure that this series is helpful to you given what you've got coming up in your communities. So we hope that you'll use that question and answer period to glean insights that you can take to your community. Now, before we get started, as we always do, we want to start with some poll questions. So I'm going to invite Manny or Jay to pop those up. We just want to get a sense of where you and your communities are on this issue. There we go. Thank you. First question, how prepared is your city's infrastructure to support a transition to AVs? Second question is, what's your top concern about the infrastructure demands that AVs will create for your city? I'm going to give you a moment so you can respond to those questions and so we can have a sense of who's in the room. All right. And as you get your last few responses in, I'm going to hand the mic over to my partner, Anthony Townsend, over at Cornell Tech. Anthony, as he often does, is sort of going to ground us in some context and some foundational knowledge on the topic and hand it back to me to introduce our speakers. So Anthony, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to take a few minutes to overview kind of where we're at and what the big picture around autonomous vehicle rollouts looks like. I had to go just check my facts. I really can't believe it's been 15 years now, almost to the day, since Google's self-driving car project was announced in the fall of 2010. So we're like a whole generation into the R&D effort to bring this technology to city streets, and we're starting to see deployments happen all over the country and all over the world. So it's taking quite a lot longer, I think, than a lot of people expected, but it's here and it's time to deal with it. If I could have the next slide, please. I think one way of looking at what's happening right now is that the fear of the sort of unknown of autonomous vehicles is giving way to what we might call fear of missing out. So as this technology starts to get deployed, people are seeing what the benefits of it are, um, and the opportunity to transform transportation. So I think that's really what's driving this. From the tech giant perspective, they're again about 10, 15 years into multi-billion-dollar investments, and they have to start cashing in on that. Um, there's been quite a big PR push this fall. We've seen like health safety advocates, a lot of op-eds and stories getting kind of seeded in the news media about the benefits. And this is directed at policymakers trying to get them to greenlight these technologies. We're seeing that around the safety benefits, but also around some of the geopolitical issues, particularly competition with China, where this technology is rolling out very, very quickly. At the same time that push is coming from multiple directions, we're seeing both kind of continuing, but also new um, uh, forces that are, sort of slowing things down. Demand is still pretty weak for self-driving vehicles. AAA surveys pretty regularly for the last decade its membership, and still has found that this year that about 6 in 10 drivers are just outright afraid to ride in one. Um, and those who actively support this technology are actually quite small. It's about 1 in 8. We're also seeing new safety concerns, and I think we'll hear a bit from this from our city guests today. Um, there was a very highly publicized analysis this week of Waymo vehicles continuing, despite multiple attempts to fix the problem of driving past stopped school buses with their stop signs, despite creating a huge safety concern. There's a lot of widespread concern about labor impacts in multiple sectors, in ride-hail taxi services, as well as in trucking. Um, and we're seeing other kind of modes of automated vehicles, other vehicle types making inroads much more quietly. So like sidewalk delivery robots, driverless shuttles, which are little mini buses that can kind of do first mile, last mile transportation. So it's a more complicated picture than just self-driving cars and self-driving taxis. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is a diagram that we produced for a primer for cities back in 2017 as part of the Bloomberg initiative on cities and autonomous vehicles. And I use this one a lot in talks when I talk about autonomous vehicles because it really captures the big picture of how automobiles have worked their way into cities and the kind of waves of development that they've gone through and how it keeps getting faster. So if you go back to 1920, which is when automobiles started arriving in cities, it's in large numbers for the first time. It took about 60 years um, for that process to sort of run its course up until about 1980. And from 1980 to about 2020 is when you see what I call saturation, this process of saturation happening, where essentially road networks in metropolitan areas run out of space, and we see more and more cars and more traffic, and the capacity of those road networks sort of meeting its limits. That happened, about 20 years faster. It didn't take long once we reached full motorization to get full saturation. Um, Most forecasts from industry, from academia, from all perspectives are that this automation transition could happen in as short as 20 years. So, I like to say like a lot of what transportation planners do is deal with the consequences of that saturation. And now we're going to also have to deal with the rapidly approaching consequences of automation. So this is really just to give you a sense of the urgency of addressing this. Next, please. So, as I mentioned, Bloomberg Philanthropy sponsored an initiative partnership with the Aspen Institute from 2017 to 2019, where we brought together 10 cities from around the world to think strategically about this AV transition. And I was part of the team that produced a bunch of materials to support that effort. I just shared links to all of them, and we'll also share those in the email follow-up to the session. But going from left to right, the first was a booklet we called Taming the Autonomous Vehicle, a primer for cities, really trying to make it clear that this should be a city's first transition, not a technology or vehicles first transition. That this is really about finding a place for AVs in cities and making that happen. We also produced a compendium of what at the time in 2019 there were already about 135 AV pilots where cities were playing an active role in shaping the pilot that had been carried out around the world. And there's some really great insights from those early experiences, and cities have continued to pilot, as we'll hear. We also looked forward to the future and produced four scenarios outlining and describing both textually and visually in the form of sort of newspaper articles from the future, some city-centered future use cases, again, going beyond just automating the operation of ride hail. And then as part of this initiative also, NACTO produced a really detailed, really forward-thinking and comprehensive blueprint for autonomous urbanism, which is a set of street design guidelines and data requirements that cities can use as they think about their infrastructure needs going forward. Next slide. The last thing that I'll share with you is a book that I wrote following the completion of that initiative in 2019. This was really an attempt to take all that we had heard from cities, all of the research that we had done, trying to understand where this AV industry was going and where it was going to intersect with cities and really what cities' interests were. And to kind of extrapolate it into the future and think about a bunch of unanswered questions. I won't go into a bunch of detail here, but really the three things that I explain in the book that I think are going to shape this future for cities are specialization. So, looking beyond just automobiles, really looking at this as a technology that can help us move beyond automobiles. Materialization, which is trying to draw attention to goods transportation and freight and the resurgent importance of that over passenger transportation as we automate. And then financialization, which is really about what happens when more and more of the mobility system in cities is really a private sector activity, and how cities can continue to monitor and regulate and steer that in a way that's beneficial for everyone. So with that, I think we'll turn it back over to Tina to introduce our speakers, and we'll hear from the folks who are grappling with this on the ground.
Thanks, Anthony. So if we go to the next slide, you're only going to see three people on this slide. But again, Anthony wrote the book on this. So as always, as a former city official, I'm just really excited that we're bringing to y'all these really expert perspectives, folks on the ground doing this work, because I think that's what's going to be most helpful. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm excited to introduce our speakers today, starting with Rachel Castagnoli, who's a senior consultant with the Austin, Texas Transportation and Public Works. Stephanie Dock with Washington, D.C.'s Department of Transportation, where Stephanie is the D.C. Autonomous Vehicles Program Manager. Again, we've got the best speakers, y'all. Like, these are folks leading the work happening right now. And then rounding us out, Story Bellows, who's a partner with CityFi. So as we welcome these speakers, Rachel, I want to start with you. And actually, if we can go to the next slide, which I understand sort of gives some context, I want you to give us the lay of the land in Austin, Rachel. Who's testing AVs in your city? Who's operating them commercially?
Sure, absolutely. Hey everyone, I'm Rachel in Austin. And here we have two kind of commercial deployments. Let's say that's Waymo with about 350 vehicles through the Uber app, as well as Tesla, which has a robo-taxi service through its Tesla app. There we're seeing about 20 vehicles, but they have many more kind of in their testing program. We also have Zoox, which is owned by Amazon. They are testing here with a plan to launch in 2026, and you'll see that they're in San Francisco and Vegas right now, fully deployed. And those vehicles don't have driver controls, so those are really custom-built vehicles. We also have Volkswagen ADMT testing here, with about 20 vehicles, and then AV Ride, which is our fifth company. So we're working with all these companies, which probably altogether have about 500 vehicles, maybe 600 vehicles on our roads. Each one has a different safety culture. Each one has kind of a different way of wanting to work with us. And each one has different procedures for emergencies around the vehicles. So it is a lot of work right now, and we're hoping that over time the industry and cities kind of standardize how we work together.
Wow, so you have a lot, there is a lot going on in Austin, Rachel. I'd love to hear, and I think folks on today's Zoom are wondering the same. What type of challenges, like on a day-to-day basis, what's coming up for y'all, given the number of operators you've got in Austin?
Yeah, so one challenge really is that number of operators in the sense that our fire, police, our first responders are learning the procedures on five different vehicles, like how to get into it, how to take it over, how to move it, who to communicate with. So that's always a challenge. But our biggest challenge right now really is around hand signals. This is something that autonomous vehicles we find still kind of struggle with. There's not really a standard way of doing hand signals. We are relying on hand signals for a lot of traffic control still, especially around special events and emergencies. So that's a challenge. As you referred to earlier, we've had 20 violations of our school bus arm laws. And so figuring out how we can support Waymo in complying with that law is something we're kind of considering and thinking through. And then just, special events and emergency sites. We find these vehicles are excellent when roadways are clear, and as expected. And when we start to set up cones, when we have a construction site, or when we have a University of Texas football game, that's where we begin to run into issues. You and I would perceive, I think, as drivers, how we're expected to act in ways that autonomous vehicles aren't socialized because they're not social yet to do. So that's around emergency sites and special event sites is still a place where we have some conflict.
Mm. That makes a ton of sense. I'm curious as you, like, even just in thinking about those school bus violations or what's happening with special events, it makes me think about sort of just how you're tracking everything going on. Can you speak a little bit about the kinds of data that AV operators are sharing with you? Because I am curious as to what is sort of closed off in their system and then what you're able to obtain. So what kind of data are you able to get from the operators? And based on that, what are you learning?
Yeah, in Texas, cities are completely preempted from making any rules around autonomous vehicles. So we have to treat them exactly like we would treat drivers. And we get no data. We can ask for data, and we have asked for data. And sometimes an AV company will give us data, especially if it's around infrastructure that they're struggling with. So, a stop sign will be hanging to the side, and they'll notice it immediately, right? Because the vehicle perceives that, and they'll let us know, mostly because they want the vehicle to keep going. But yeah, we don't receive any data from AV companies. Some of them do self-report incidents, which, we love to hear it from AV companies instead of the news. But we do have a dashboard, which you have on this. And I just put the link in it because there's about 192 incidents now. And we keep this dashboard based on 301, based on tickets that were given out by police, based on feedback from our fire and our EMS and our parking. We just have so many people in the right of way giving feedback all the time about what they're seeing. And what this really helps us with this dashboard is look at our infrastructure and try to determine if our infrastructure is causing issues or if our procedures are causing issues, like the way we set up cones, the way we do hand signals. So really, this is a great feedback loop for us to say, hey, can you help us understand why the autonomous vehicle acted this way? And for us to also say, is this about this intersection? Is this about like this cone pattern, or is this about like a software fix that needs to happen? So this keeps
Right.
both of us, kind of all of us, accountable to one another about how we make the city safer.
Yeah. I'm curious. So, okay, they're not sharing data, but there's so much coordination that is needed to sort of not address the gaps that come from not having their data, but just to build a fuller picture so that y'all can be taking the right steps for the city and for your community. I'm just so curious, how are you staffing that coordination and oversight? Like, is that you, Rachel? Just tell us a little bit more because I think other cities are likely curious. How do I, how they should be thinking about sort of staffing this area given what we expect to see in the years to come. So, how are you approaching that? And if you can also speak to sort of what capacities and skills you think are in need based on the rollout that you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So we in NACDO, right, we have a fairly large autonomous vehicle subcommittee that meets pretty frequently. And we see all sorts of folks in it, right? A lot of planners, a lot of some engineers. I'm an attorney. Like the person who does this job in San Francisco is also an attorney. And I think
Mhm.
everyone's bringing a different uh a way of looking at it, right? Like I'm looking at everything as risk. But yeah, it does take a person, maybe dedicated, to do the coordination. But I don't know, like I'm not an expert in traffic control plans or first responder or evacuation procedures or anything like that. I think the most important role I play is knowing who to go to at the city, especially around like airport issues, transit issues, making sure that we find the right person who can act as a subject matter expert and kind of bring them in, engage with the AV companies with us, and create the policies and procedures that work for the city. So yes, it's a lot of my time because I'm kind of the gateway to the city and the school district and transit now. But we meet as a group once a month, just internally and really work through our incidents and what we could be doing better, and how we move forward with all our AV partners.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. Stephanie, I'd love to invite you in because I want to hear about, let's hear the lay of the land in DC. So if we can go to the next slide, we've got a similar slide on Washington, DC. There we go. Stephanie, my first question for you is similar to how I invited Rachel to get us started. Can you give us a lay of the land on AVs in DC? Who's testing and who's operating them commercially?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So your local friendly city state DOT, which is notable when it comes up how we compare to what Rachel has. But notably, we don't have any commercial deployment of autonomous vehicles. It is not permitted in DC at this time. We only allow the testing. And right now we are in a interim period where we have kind of a legislative gap filling process in place where we are required to be notified that autonomous vehicles are here, but they don't have to get a permit. But the district does have legislation in place that would envisions a permit, and we have been working through the regulatory process to put that in effect. But right now, Waymo and Zoox are both testing. They are allowed to engage the ADS, but they have so the automated driving system that like the computer brain that does the driving, but they have to have a safety operator behind the wheel. So I have nothing driverless on my streets right now. There have been some other companies that have come through for visits, but nothing sustained. Although at the moment, we also have a visit going on from an autonomous bus that is ADAS tech with through Beep, and they've automated a Carson E-Jest vehicle, which is about like a 10-seat, 15, maybe upwards of 20 passengers. You'd be really tight if you were in there with 20. But they're running around for a few months just to kind of see what the area looks like. And so we're interested in seeing where the transit option might go, but it's a bit of a unique twist because it's the one that's not just looking to launch operations. It would need some level of government partnership.
Gotcha. So Stephanie, given that you have a couple of firms testing but not operating, can you share just to help us sort of compare with what Rachel's got in Austin? What are the challenges on a day-to-day basis for you in DC?
Thankfully, having a driver behind the wheel who can take over mitigates a lot of the potential issues, and the fleets right now are quite small. I'd say both companies are under 25 vehicles. I'd have to look at the numbers. I'm not allowed to tell you the exact. I do know the exact amounts, but I'm not supposed to. They're very cagey about what they want shared.
Interesting.
But we are seeing some So I'm not seeing a lot of day-to-day challenges. People are seeing them. We're getting comments. There's some interest. Usually when a new operator shows up, the media kind of picks up on it. But most of the challenges we might see that we hear about from particularly talking with folks in Austin and San Francisco, we're not running into kind of any of the craziness on the streets. But there is a lot of advanced preparation that we're thinking about based on what we've heard and we know to expect. DC has some unique features. Amongst them, that there are 29 agencies that can do some form of law enforcement on our roadways. And maybe like a very small share of those are actually DC government. The vast majority, I think, are actually federal, and their jurisdictions vary by what they can do. And most of them are probably present in almost everybody's jurisdiction some of the time. It's just we happen to have a very large presence of the Secret Service. And various military police arms, which mostly stay on their campuses, but we have a lot of different forms of the military and law enforcement that are here. So preparing for that and recognizing that those vehicles will not be they're not going to look necessarily like a typical emergency vehicle, but also like don't mess with the Secret Service when they're moving a motorcade. Um, and just trying to prepare for like what do we need to convey and thinking a lot more, I think, about the digital infrastructure that we might want to put in place that could help with managing some of these aspects. And since we don't have deployment right now, we have a little bit the luxury of trying to frame that before we step into actual activity, like large scale activity.
Yeah. It's so just an observation, given sort of what Rachel shared that in Austin, they're not having a lot of data sharing. And it sounds like even if you might know pieces of information, Stephanie, you're not able to share that. I'm just curious. I want to dig in a little bit on this point. So first, just curious, since you have sort of humans behind the wheel as a safety check, do you know how often those human operators need to intervene? Do you get that information?
Not right now. But
Okay.
it is one of the pieces that we would be expecting in some way to get through once we have our regulatory process in place. So
Got it.
once we have a permitting program open, there will be quarterly data reporting that is required. However, the one piece that I do get is when the autonomous driving system is engaged, if there is a crash, they are required to report it to us. Similar to the federal reporting that they have to do, though, unfortunately for them, our legislation requires a faster turnaround on that information.
Okay.
And I can't fix that. Our legislature wrote that. But they do have to tell us whether there has been an incident and make sure that we're informed of that. So I have more insight, assuming things happen, and we've had one crash reported to us. We don't have a lot going on right now, but to the level of incidents that Rachel is reporting, I have the luxury of getting it with the exact location and a lot more information without having to rely on alternatives.
Okay.
But we are also looking at some of the critical data pieces that I think we all recognize, like vehicle miles traveled. How much has the vehicle been driving? Because crash rates are really what you would be looking for. And then thinking about just where are they struggling with the infrastructure, which we hope that they would want to talk to us regardless.
Right.
But it becomes a mandatory item for us. So thinking about how to keep it as a collaborative dialogue once we move into permitting is something that we're also considering.
Yeah. Well, and like the similar question I asked Rachel, given that level of collaboration that you know is going to help to just build a stronger system for everyone, including consumers, but for DC and for the operators, I'm curious how is DC approaching staffing this area in terms of coordination and oversight, recognizing in particular coordination with the feds is so important for you.
Uh, So at the moment, in terms of dedicated staff, there is myself and a program analyst that works on my team. We also have a policy analyst working with us closely, and one of the legal members of our legal team, is pretty deep in this. And I'll just say that I think this is why, Rachel has a lot of coordination to do. This is also a really complicated technical topic when you really get into it. And so having somebody dedicated to actually get into that. In our case, we are, with just myself and a program analyst, probably understaffed in order to fully run the permitting program that we need. And when the program was developed and put before council, it was envisioned to have a staff of at least 3. So we have some positions that are somewhat in limbo. So I have some resources that I will hopefully be able to draw back should we get to live permitting, just because we need to be able to monitor permit compliance, conduct all of those checks in ways that, just like everyone else who runs a permitting program, you got to do those pieces. And I will say it didn't come up here because we're talking about the on-road vehicles, but you mentioned earlier that autonomy is, or someone mentioned that autonomy is more than just the on-road. My team is also responsible for the oversight of sidewalk delivery robots. So we do permitting in that space as well, which does put all of the autonomy kind of under one umbrella and allows us to build consistency, even though legislatively the 2 programs are quite distinct, but we are trying to get consistency between them where it's possible, and at least streamline the permitting side of it so that we are using resources effectively.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure folks appreciate that when they're on the other end of, because anybody who's been through any permitting process, right? It's always helpful when there's some intentional design there. So I'm sure that's appreciated. Stephanie, I'm curious, having lived in DC myself, I just appreciate y'all are part of this region. And I'm just curious how you're engaging with state and local leaders in Maryland and Virginia on the issue. Is that an area of coordination that is happening, or are you really focused on within the bounds of the district, sort of coordinating with the feds? Tell us a little bit about that.
We're definitely talking to our regional partners. Maryland is a bit more active in this space, has had some clear leads. They have a really good connected and automated vehicle working group. I'm actually speaking to it on Thursday. So if anybody's in the area, head to Annapolis, although you can hear much the same stuff. They have a couple other speakers as well, but they have a good group. They meet regularly, much like Rachel's group does, and brings things together for that. Virginia has been legislatively more or less silent on this topic, and so it's not as clear where that is, but we recognize that this has to be regional. We've talked to our metropolitan planning organization about kind of leading as a coordinating entity on this as well. And one of the particular challenges and why it's critical that we talk as a region, the district does not have an industrial history, which means that the land use aspects that go with this are going to require a regional approach. We don't have the land and the power for depots, maintenance facilities. We want some of it to be in the district, but we have to recognize that anybody who wants to run a commercial service will be running beyond just the district's boundaries, and the scale of facilities that they're going to need to support that probably can't be located effectively inside the district. I mean, from a purely economic development perspective, maybe there's an argument for requiring it, but like realistically, we just don't have enough open flat land zoned industrial to allow for that type of activity. And there's other competing uses. Warehouses for delivery services are also looking for the exact same features. So we're trying to think about how do we fit the charging infrastructure that's going to support that, given that it's not like we've got lots of open lots. Almost all of the vacant lots have been turned into something. I work in the Navy Yard neighborhood. That picture of the Zooks vehicle and the bus are both down in Navy Yard. And those are areas that those used to have a lot of surface parking, and now they don't. And so it's expensive to do structured, and we just don't have much to offer in that. So we know it's going to probably head to Maryland because we have an interconnected network to that. But I think something that anybody that's looking at this should be thinking about is where you're going to put that. And I'll say we heard that from San Francisco, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it's really just hit home how critical that's going to be.
That's fascinating. Well, Anne, I think any of us who have been to DC or lived in DC can appreciate that point you made, Stephanie, about the district's been changing and going through a ton of development. So there isn't a lot of empty space. On that point, Rachel, I wonder if I can come back to you quickly, because a lot of folks in our audience today might be representing smaller towns and cities. I'd love to invite you to share, how are you bringing smaller suburban communities in your region into the conversations you're having in Austin?
Absolutely. This summer, the FHWA sponsored a kind of roundtable symposium in Austin and asked us to do a lot of outreach to our suburban neighbors, which we did and brought them in. And they had, some of the same concerns we did and some really different concerns. They don't have the transit, right, that we have in the city of Austin. So they were really looking at this as an opportunity to kind of increase mobility in their smaller neighborhoods and districts. They're wondering about dedicated pickup drop off locations and like commercial central areas. They're also very engaged with freight. Right. We don't have like a depot in the city of Austin for autonomous freight, although it goes through Austin on I-35. But a lot of our smaller towns along I-35 are really engaged with commercial freight, coming up from Mexico, especially. So they really wanted to know more about how autonomous freight is working in Texas. We have a lot of autonomous freight in Texas, so that was really cool. But also, they wanted to make sure that populations could age in place, that they, in these smaller places with fewer resources, were supporting their disabled populations and other populations we find that like autonomous vehicles or rely on autonomous vehicles more. So we did want to make sure we connected them with our AV partners so that they could get a lot of the benefits from autonomous vehicles.
It's really interesting. And I appreciate that difference in sort of what different communities are like what the use cases are and what providers are, how operators are showing up in different communities. Um, this is really helpful, and I want to put a plug as we go along. Follow Ingrid's lead and drop any questions you have in the chat because we've got this incredible brain trust here. And I want to make sure that this information is helpful to all of you who are calling in and thinking about what is in store for your communities with autonomous vehicles in 2026. If we can take the slides down, I would love to invite Story Bellows from CityFi, who has worked on this sort of from a perspective that, Story, I'm excited for you to give us sort of a more industry-wide view. And I'm going to start, Story, by asking you, so you previously led the Knight Foundation's AV initiative, which was underway around the time that COVID hit. Great timing for all of us. Can you tell us a little bit about that effort? What were the effort's goals? What did you learn from that work that you led?
Yeah, so CityFi worked with the University of Oregon and the cities of Detroit, Pittsburgh, San Jose, and Miami to learn about sort of like public acceptance and what were some of the civic, human-centered issues that were going to be facing cities around AV deployment and AV adoption. And as we went into these cities and we were like, let's talk about AVs. You literally had people being like adult videos, like audio visual, what were the issues that we were going in and talking about. And it did require in those cities being able to engage and think about like, how are we talking about the stop sign that those folks do care about deeply in order to get to the place where talking about AVs was something that made sense. And this started in 2018, and it just felt like it was so far away to so many residents.
Yeah.
But like as we look at the timeline of deployments and what Anthony showed earlier, like this is coming like a freight train very, very quickly. Then in 2020, obviously you have COVID hit. Even before that, though, we were recognizing that the companies weren't quite at the point of deploying at the scale that we are seeing now. And so we were already talking about a pivot. Then COVID hits, and obviously nobody's moving anywhere. But delivery becomes a much more critical issue at that point in time. And so we started working with KiwiBot and set up pilots in each of those 4 cities to start to like figure out what were the like practical learnings that we could get out of those deployments, and how could we understand critically some of the equity issues and potential implications of working with lower income folks, BIPOC folks, disabled folks, elderly individuals, in order to help cities think about the policy framework that they were going to set up. And I think as Stephanie was talking about it, like there's a whole range from these things that are operating on sidewalks to all of these vehicles that we're seeing in Europe and that President Trump highlighted the other day of we want these smaller vehicles coming into our cities, whether they're autonomous or not, we don't necessarily have regulatory frameworks set up to respond to all of these different vehicle types. And that's a lot of work for individual municipalities to start to think about how do you create that entire spectrum of regulations, and sort of what are the model codes potentially that could be developed to help cities scale the deployments that make sense, and support the scaling of deployments that do make sense in their cities.
Interesting. I want to sort of dig into that a little bit because when I think about, and my hope is that this is helpful for folks on the call, just understanding sort of who are the key players in this space. Maybe some communities are earlier on in their journey, right? I heard Rachel and Stephanie, right? There was some common operators, but Story, I want you to sort of ground us in who are the key players that maybe haven't been mentioned in this sort of AI industry space, and what are they trying to get out of of local governments? How do we sort of help folks on today's call build an appreciation for that?
I think public trust and speed to market are probably things that companies, whether you know them or you don't know them, there are a lot of companies that are manufacturing smaller autonomous robots that people haven't necessarily heard about. I think obviously Waymo has sort of taken the lead in terms of speed to market in the US. Although Tesla, is right up there as well. And I think probably those companies don't necessarily want to be mentioned in the same breath, that they think of themselves as very different types of companies. But I think what these companies want out of cities, and whether cities can or should give those companies what they want, they do want validation. They do want to be able to get in really quickly. I think that's critical. I think, as Anthony also mentioned, and it's critical for cities to understand what are the pressures that these companies are feeling when they are coming in. If you understand what do they need, they may not care about revenue for 5-10 years, or they
Right.
may care very deeply about something that is going to be able to turn a profit in a couple of years. Understanding that type of motivation from a city's perspective in terms of the companies that you're working with is really critical. I think it's also important, and it's important on both sides. And I will say, in full disclosure, like we've advised Waymo for we advised them for 5 years on sort of how they were going into cities anymore. We're not at this point in time, but I think about, like, they're not one size fits all. Cities aren't one size fits all. What a
Right.
policy team potentially needs, what an operations team potentially needs, like understanding sort of the levers and the drivers of those different operators within a company, I think is really important in order to create alignment, which I think I think it is possible. I don't think it's easy, but I think it's possible. Likewise, on the city side, what a Department of Transportation cares about deeply may be very different than, as we're talking about the labor issues, or what a mayor's office may care about. And so I think from both sides, sort of understanding who you're talking to and what's that network of different incentives is really important in order to be able to come up with like creative deployments of these programs that actually solve problems. Like, that's what we started this Knight Foundation work, like thinking about, like, how do we use this new technology to solve problems that people actually care about
Yeah.
under real world conditions. And I think we have those opportunities, but I think it's understanding where everybody's coming from and getting beyond, hopefully, this like either I have a permit or I don't have a permit. Like, that the creative problem solving is going to be, I think, where there is the space for more collaboration. I think right now we're in a pretty rough patch where it's like the company's like, I just need to operate, I just need to operate, I just need a permit.
Right.
Like, and the cities are like, whoa, we do not operate at that same pace of technology.
Right.
And it's really hard to develop policy at the pace and like feeling that pressure that's coming from the private sector.
Yeah. I want to pull the thread on that a little bit, Story. And Rachel and Stephanie, I'm going to invite y'all to reflect on this question as well. So that for all of y'all, is it clear yet, like what all this might mean for how we design and build and plan, like design, build, and plan city infrastructure? Like, do we need different types of streets? Should we be focusing more on sidewalk delivery and how we need to adjust the infrastructure for that? How do you all think about that?
Well, I would say that I hope we don't prioritize like the development of our streets for autonomous vehicles. Like I would say, I hope we don't prioritize the development of our streets and our public right of way for single passenger automobiles. I think we need to like make sure that we don't lose our focus on the basics of like what makes a great street and a great place and a
Mm-hmm.
great transportation system, which I think is that like a single vehicle type is not right for every person at every time.
Yeah.
And so how are we going to continue to support this mix of broader vehicle types for more trips than we see right now?
Mm.
Yeah, and I'll add that the new MUTCD Chapter 5 does have infrastructure guidelines for autonomous vehicles. These are just guidelines, these are not required by the MUTCD, but what you'll find in there is thicker striping, less sign clutter, things that could probably help drivers as well, more retro reflectivity. So there are opportunities for us to make our streets safer for drivers and autonomous vehicles at the same time. Where we kind of are afraid of going is in too much of a smart infrastructure way where we've got to operate and maintain, complex connected infrastructure that's only works for these three companies, which are some of the wealthiest companies in the world. So we're really focused on, checking our intersections where we're seeing AV problems. Are the stripes looking good? Are the signs clear? Is this a place where we have human crashes? And just making sure that, especially around locations like fire stations, where we have clear striping, everyone understands what they're supposed to be doing, and we're using kind of standard signs.
Rachel, I really appreciate that point about that's not just beneficial for AVs, but also for human drivers. That just feels makes a ton of sense. Stephanie, anything what you want to add?
The one, and I mentioned it briefly in the chat, but
Yeah.
curbside management has been a huge rising topic at the fore of cities for for several years now. But the way we think about that does have the potential to adjust with autonomy. And it's not like I need to fix this tomorrow kind of problem, but it does adjust some of the pressures on there. One piece I frankly think about is if you are trying to do good pickup drop off, and we could do this for the humans too, but with the AVs, in theory, we can make sure that they actually use the zones. um, is we have a ton of residential parking on our residential streets, and we also have a lot of double parking for deliveries, for human pickup drop off. And we've tried some of the adjustments in our curbside programming. But if we're looking at a much larger share of autonomous vehicles and, Story, to your point, trying to drive not just a personal automobile story, but one that is about broader mobility in the community, two choices if you're going to do safe pickup drop off are either I need to rethink who gets to use my bus stops, which every single transit operator should be panicking. But there's thoughts here, right? If the vehicle knows what the bus is connected and you know when it's coming, there's like a vision of the future where that's possible, and I have an accessible zone. The other is that I possibly need to look at taking some of the parking away, but with the trade-off that do we really need that parking in the same way? Because now I can tell the story differently to a public that is generally not terribly amenable to the reduction in parking. Even in a very multimodal city like DC, it can be quite the third rail. And so I'm not saying I'm doing anything tomorrow. Please don't go writing articles that say I'm taking your parking for autonomous vehicles, but just the reality that if we're going to think about a safe deployment in the future, that is one of the places, even if you are not a city that has any control over this, that is available and has potential. And I think there's other pieces of that with like digitization of zones, changing of how kind of when the programming happens and how you do that, opportunities for more nuanced ways of doing parking data, parking fee collection with automation and some of that. So I think there's room there that won't we would have good reason to do it anyway.
Yeah, the revenue generation potential of that, I think, is something that's really important for cities, as they're looking at filling budget holes moving forward.
Yeah, can I
Good
charge for
point.
the curb kiss as opposed to you need to get out of the car and pay for 10 minutes of parking? We're never going to win that one.
Yeah.
And we can't
Um,
enforce fast enough. So
Key part of this is around enforcement, which I know we didn't touch on, and as well as there's a number of other points. This has been such a rich discussion, and I want to be respectful of our speakers' time and folks who have joined. So I'm going to ask the three of y'all a question that I ask everyone who's been on a Tech and Innovation Center session, which is if you can share one piece of practical advice for cities that have joined today's call. We always want to ground this in again, being able to take your expertise and experience and pay it forward. So if each of you can share one piece of practical advice that you have for cities who are joining today's call, or maybe they're watching this recording after the fact.
Sure. I would say that now is the time to talk to your first responders, your schools, your whatever you've got, if you got an airport, all of that, and like start coming together and talking about your expectations. An AV company will reach out to all of these people separately, and some of them will hear some story and some of them will hear a slightly different version of that. So it's really helpful. And what really works for us in Austin is having a really good group, that communicates well with one another and that stays focused together on the safety of deployments, and not like what works for the police or what works for fire or what works for transportation. So I would strongly recommend, like, as soon as you can, starting to socialize these ideas, with your folks and make it a kind of cross your city and with other groups within your city. Your MPO is a great example of someone you should be engaged with. And then you're ready when they come.
Okay, that's great advice, Rachel. Thank you. And I do want to flag for everyone, we have some closing poll questions that just popped up for you. So as you're hearing the great advice from our speakers, if you can provide your thoughts on the two questions. How was this session helpful on expanding your existing knowledge? And then, trying to get a sense of if this is a topic we should program for in future sessions. Stephanie, what's another great piece of advice you've got based on your experience?
I think it builds a lot on what Rachel says, which is just like get yourself involved and informed as you start to build those connections internally. I think we've all learned with other emerging tech that has come in, it sometimes once it comes fast. And so just having the groundwork laid so you know who to talk to and how to do that. And then the other one is particularly for anybody who's a member of NACTO, like please come to the working group, but also reach out to the cities that have it. I don't want like to send people to Rachel and inundate her and too much, but like Rachel, I think like your document that you give to the AV companies of kind of expectations when you come in, even though you don't have the regulatory authority, is like a great model. And I have learned a ton just talking with the cities that have activity going on, because if that isn't there, I just have a much better sense of what I might be looking at having had those conversations.
Dory, round us out.
I would say play the long game. Understand what are going to be the critical issues for operations teams, like the curbside management or access to parking, or access to facilities for charging and that type of thing. And like, I guess also to come back to what Rachel said, use that to engage and align your stakeholders internally, because you guys need to be on the same page. And say yes to the conversations with those companies. I think the more you talk to them, the better you're going to be at understanding where they're coming from, and what's driving their interest in deployment in your city.
Man, I sort of wish we could extend for another half hour because again, there's like way more questions to ask the three of you. But let me just invite everyone on the Zoom to join me in thanking Rachel, Stephanie, and Story for joining us, sharing their expertise. Special shout out for Anthony again, who may not have been on the speaker slide, but brings so much knowledge and insight on this topic. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And y'all, we're at the end of the year, so we will be back in 2026 with more Tech and Innovation Center sessions. So stay tuned for more. And to keep track, the Local Infrastructure Hub website is a great way to see upcoming events. So check the website to see upcoming programming on issues like autonomous vehicles, but there is so much more happening on the hub. Check it out if it can be helpful to your community. Thanks, everyone. And as we wind down the year, here's wishing everyone a very happy new year. We'll see you in 2026. Thanks, everyone.